And welcome, and thank you very much, Lou. Welcome, everyone, participants. You're welcome. We just gone through the process of getting into simultaneous translations or interpretation. I am very happy to be your moderator for the next 90 minutes. But before we start, I would like to wish everyone a very, very happy Africa Unity Day. We're celebrating Africa Unity, and we're so privileged to have pulled together all these companies, all these producers, micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises or agri-businesses. We're happy to have pulled together scholars, policymakers, professionals of all walks of life to celebrate this day. And it comes when we are really treating a very important topic of importance to Africa. And so far, it has been Pan-Africanic. It has been putting Africa at the center. We hope, after a very successful first day where we had interesting panels, we are inviting you to this session, which is very, very practical session with experts, well-experienced practitioners to respond to the question, is it worth the effort? Experiences from the valorization of carbon sequestration schemes by agricultural, micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises. We learned a lot yesterday from the different panel of experts telling us about the implications of impacts of climate change to small producers. They're already feeling the impacts. We also learned that Africa, which contributes less than 3% of the causes of climate change, only receives 5% of the climate finance. And we've explored the different climate flows, climate finance flows, and today we are coming to the practical experiences. And we've brought together a group of experts who have been practicing on the ground, looking at ways for how small-scale farmers can mobilize resources from climate finance. And today we have a pool of 4 well-experienced experts. We have Mr. Dennis Shurai. Dennis is an advisor at the Global Soil Program at the GIZ. He's an expert on land use management and climate change adaptation and mitigation. And we also have Mr. Geoffrey Onyango. Geoffrey is also an advisor at the climate change program in GIZ Global Soil Program. He coordinates the carbon certification program in Kenya. He has more than 20 years experience in the domain of sustainable land use management and climate mitigation and adaptation. And we have Ms. Viridiana Alcantara Shivapantam. She's from the Vera certification program, where she's a senior program officer at Vera, which Vera develops new agricultural projects with voluntary carbon standards and explore the possibilities of promoting regenerative agriculture. In this role, she provides technical advice on the use of technology and emergent approach. Before joining Vera, she supported for 10 years sustainable management projects on soils in the global space. And as a member of the Executive Secretariat of the 4 for 1,000 initiative, as a soil in charge of soil at the FAO. I'm sorry that I have this in French and I'm just translating them in English. And we have finally Mr. Amos Vekesa, who is a regional advisor for climate change and environment at the VI Agroforestry. Ladies and gentlemen, once more, welcome. And we're looking forward to having a very interactive session. The session we'll have the speakers take turns for 15 minutes each. And at the end of their speech or their presentations, we are going to call on our active participants, to come up with questions, to join the fishbowl and give their contributions and experiences. And please, to do that, we'll invite you to just send us a chat, because there's no possibility that you can raise your hand. Send us a chat message, and then we shall invite you to unmute and give your contribution. With that said, I'm going to invite Dennis Shurai to present his presentation. Dennis, you have the floor.
Thank you. Have this lined up. Yeah, thank you so much, Samuel, for having us, and also the organizers for this opportunity. And we're having two sets of presentation here, in which we are looking at if the sustainable land management measures can be really a foundation of a carbon certification scheme in Kenya. Next slide. Ghg is globally implementing a soil protection rehabilitation project that is implemented in 7 countries. That is having eight projects. This program is financed by the BMZ, and in Kenya, it's particularly being implemented. You can be able to see from the map. It's being implemented in the regional counties of Bungoma, Kakamega, and Siaya. And the case for this project is really looking at the issues of excessive and inappropriate land use that has really contributed to issues of nutrient nutrition and soil erosion, which has really been hampered. I mean, they have been the situation has been made worse because of the effect of the climate change. And as a result, what we have, there has been a decline in terms of land productivity, and also the deduction in terms of the agricultural land for use. And this is where the human population or the need for food is really increasing. So as a response, GISN through the SWAP project is really implementing a wide range of sustainable land management approaches, so that we can be able to conserve and rehabilitate the graded soils in Western Kenya, with the aim of really enhancing farming resilience, especially to this climate change impact. We have a set of different packages that we are promoting, mainly targeting the small farmers. Issues of integrated watershed management. The approach we are using is the catchment approach. That is working with the different stakeholders within the various catchment, select catchment in Western Kenya. And then there is the aspect of soil and water conservation, in which we are looking at the 3 issues, the physical, the cultural, and the biological. And then on we're also promoting the 3 principles of conservation agriculture as defined by the FAO. And then there's a bit of promoting the integrated soil fertility and pest management, with the aim of really having a reduction dependence on mainly on the external input, mainly the chemicals. And then an integration of issues of the crop restock for the farmers. And so far, we have been able to reach about 120,000 farmers since 2015. And looking at these numbers, the project has also really invested on issues of digital innovations, so that you can be able to enhance the farmer outreach. We are looking at in terms of sending them the SMS messages, messages through the mass messaging, the issue of the radio broadcast. And we are looking at exploring on issues of remote sensing, so that we can be able to really focus on the various impact of these projects. Now, since 2015, there has been a remarkable impact in terms of the yield, in terms of the issues of the food security that has been enhanced for the smaller farmers. And this really also begs the question of the upscaling and the sustainability. What can be really been done so that these farmers can continue implementing this sustainable land management and one of the issue that's coming up is whether we are able to certify these measures that the farmers are implementing as a kind of upscaling and or sustainable mechanism. And with that, I'll request my colleague Geoffrey to continue with the part of this presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dennis. I think we are now looking at how we can integrate what the soil protection rehabilitation project has been doing into a more realistic and sustainable way. Next slide, please. And in doing that, GIZ was thinking of how they can convert this development project into a carbon project so that they have a long-term revenue flow to support the activities that the soil protection rehabilitation has been promoting those technologies. They are time consuming, they are very expensive, and so we were looking at the sustainable way that we can make them work. And therefore, we were trying to convert this project into a smallholder agricultural carbon farming system. And in that, we did a feasibility study. We had a lot of challenges during the feasibility study because of the COVID. People were not able to go to the field to collect enough data. And so what we had, now we are trying to correct a number of them. Back to the other one. We are trying to correct some of them. And some of the things that came back, we noted was that, I think let's go back to the former slide. Yes. One of the things that came into our attention was that the data that were being collected were not adequate. So we had to go back to collect data and re-register farmers because there is need to know exactly where these farmers are. Then we had to do a lot of sensitization and capacity development so that we can carry our farmers with us and understand exactly what carbon is. That they are trying to get engaged in. And then we had to set up a governance structure that will coordinate and manage this project. Then we were to set a monitoring scheme, and these were some IT apps to help and support in monitoring in future. So these are things that we were setting in preparation for writing the PD and moving the project forward. Next slide. And next slide, please. And in doing that, one of the key aspects that was important to help to move this project forward is to create an engine, kind of. And this was a governance structure where we have a special purpose vehicle in the orange color that will be dealing with administrative issues. And then we also have to involve the extension services, and we have partner NGOs that are doing that, who link directly with the farmer and also with the support of the government extension staff, implement the activities and the technologies that my colleague has previously talked about. And then the special purpose vehicle had a mandate of coordinating all these activities, especially to things to do with the third-party verification and validation, and also the sale of the carbon credits. And this is something that we have also put in place, and this was a vehicle that was going to drive this project. Next slide, please. Now, in this project, we have had some challenges in developing them, especially in the initial stages. And these are some of the things that make carbon project a little bit of a challenge. One of them is that land ownership issue. In Western Kenya, where this project is being set up, there is a lot of this short-term land leasing, 2 to 3 years. These are people that we could not easily accommodate in our project because of the issue of after 1 or 2 years, they move out and probably it is business as usual. Then there was this issue of carbon ownership rights. Who owns this carbon? And this is something that we also had to explain and sensitize the community to understand that not individuals can sell their carbon, but they need to look at the special purpose vehicle that will own this carbon on their behalf. And therefore, there is this issue of signing the carbon rights and giving them rights. And there are a lot of stories that has been going around about carbon projects. People talk I've got a lot of stories and myths and rumors about how carbon has got a lot of money, and therefore farmers' expectations are usually very high. And we had to manage some of those through some sensitization and capacity building. Mistrust is one of the key things that is happening. We got ourselves into when we were setting up the governance structure. You know, when you to organize 120,000 farmers into a governance structure was a bit of a challenge. There is a mistrust between themselves and also with the implementing partners. They're not sure whether these people, they should trust with their land and their rights. And then the issue that rose again is about the benefit sharing. How is this benefit going to be shared? Our program focuses on extension services. That was our main key, that the cash that accrues will be shared through giving the farmers extension services. But there was this issue, why would my credit be shared with my neighbor? And things like that. And so these are the things that we had to deal with. Then there also this low capacity to understand a carbon as a commodity. People are, they know it's a commodity they don't know that they have. And so they always think that they are being cheated because what is this that they have and they don't know that they have. So it's something that we took a lot of time to explain to people to understand so that they may be able to accept us and accept what we do with them. And then, like I mentioned, the formation of the governance structure is a very costly exercise, time consuming, and also building rapport between the parties is also taking a lot of time. And also there is the initial investment cost of setting a carbon certification project, which are a little bit high, but we hopefully this will be set up or set through carbon revenues, which are currently rising, and hopefully this will be able to set that up and you'll be able to move. Next slide, please. Then there are these benefits that accrue from this project. This is both mitigation and adaptation project, in the sense that as much as it is the activities that are being promoted, the technologies are mitigating on climate change, there are also adaptive measures that they are supporting. Like in Western Kenya, there's high frequency of droughts, and we have promoted the use of drought-resistant crops, especially the cover crops, that help also as mulching, and so it could retain moisture on the ground for a longer period of time. And then there is the production of vermiculture for sale that comes in as an alternative income for the farmers. And so this makes the farmers a little bit more resilient and they don't lose out completely. Then there is the increase in evaporation because of the rising temperatures. And we have come up with measures that, water conservation measures, that help the crops or the land to retain water for a long period of time, especially in terracing, where during the rains, the water seeps down into the soil and it is stored in the soil for a long period of time. Agroforestry system and cover crops. Then the napier grass and other grasses that are also grown help to diversify income, in the sense that you can sell these grasses or you can diversify into the livestock sector. Then there is the changes of the livestock, where we are now adopting, the farmers were adopting to smaller animals, which are easy to maintain and feed. And this has helped the farmers to be able to adopt into some of these challenges from climate. Then the third item is the changes in the incidence of agriculture pests. In the use of vermiculture, like this year round, we were attacked by the armyworms. And most farmers were not able to manage them. But our farmers used vermiculture as a pesticide, and they were able to control the armyworms in their land. Then there is also the push and pull technology, which also help. It is a technology that was developed by aircraft, which also help in repelling some of these pests. And so most of the places you'll find that the farmers that we were with us benefited because the impact was a little bit more reduced. Next slide, please. And so in the next slide, we are looking at what is it that we expect our farmers to benefit from this project. One of the things is the increased yields and income, which we have already started seeing coming either from the crops or from those other technologies like vermiculture that they are already doing and the livestock. Then there is less dependency on external inputs. Now they can use the technologies that they are promoting. They are able to use those technology without having to invest in other inputs, which are very costly, and most of them are not able to buy or procure. And then there is also this benefit, health benefit issues, because they are now able to get more nutritious food and less pollution, and the carbon credits, which comes as a benefit as well, in the sense that apart from the things they're doing, there is something that they are gaining which they are not expecting, and this is the carbon credits that come into supporting their activity. Extension service in Kenya is a little bit very expensive because it is on the basis of demand, and if you demand it, then you have to pay for the cost of bringing in an extension officer into your farm. And so the carbon credits in our planning is supposed to help farmer offset some of those costs. Thank you so much.
Great, thank you very much, Dennis and Geoffrey. What an interesting experience there on your global program on soil at GIZ. We saw how your work improving soils, through integrated watershed management, improving water availability for communities, have led into a development program becoming a carbon program. And you have put in place a whole support structure for farmers, for small farmers or producers to organize themselves into a governance structure. And you facilitated so well that process so that communities can now get both ecosystem benefits and direct income benefits. I'm sure all these presentations are very complimentary, and we're going to come back then, but I will first pass on to our next speaker. We'll be talking about the certification process. Your presentation gave us how we organize the farmers, but we have to look at a third party that provides the standards. So I will invite Ms. Viridiana Alcantara Shivapatam to join the stage. Viridiana?
Yes, thank you very much, Samuel.
We're talking about opportunities for agricultural carbon projects in the voluntary carbon market supported by Verra. We're looking forward to a very interesting presentation here that supports effectively what the GIZ project has been doing in Kenya. Thank you.
That's correct. Yes, thank you very much again also for the invitation to GIZ. And yeah, thank you, Geoffrey and Dennis, for this very interesting presentation. I think some things I will repeat, but that's, I think, no problem. Then it's clear for everyone. So yeah, let's get the slide started, please. For the next one. Yeah, so to give you a little bit of context on like the role of carbon markets and credits, because sometimes when you mention carbon markets, credits, people have different types of expectations. And it's very important to clarify what their role can be in like an overall global strategy to tackle climate change. If we see this figure up here, the mitigation we need to reach 1.5 degrees to stay below 1.5 degrees of warming by 2030 is about 27 gigatons of carbon emission reductions. And what we have issued through the voluntary carbon market here as VCM in 2021 is not even 1% of that. And even with a very large projected growth expected to achieve 3 gigatons, that will only be about 10% of what we need to achieve. Therefore, it's important to highlight that carbon credits and offsets are only a transition tool. They are supposed to help towards a decarbonized economy, and they must be part of a broader strategy. Their main character is like a catalyzing function, so to trigger change, not to be the entire change. This is also reflected in what is known as mitigation hierarchy for larger companies mostly, but also countries. So the first most important priority is to avoid activities, economic activities that lead to very high emissions. Then in those activities, reduce the emissions to the minimum, those that cannot be avoided, replacing or substituting high emission options or processes through other alternatives that cause lower emissions. And only at the end, we have the offsets through carbon credits. So yes, it's not like the only solution, but it must be part of a bigger strategy. And the voluntary carbon market works right now because of several things. One is that government action has not been sufficient. So that leads to certain corporates taking the lead in providing finance, and that fuels the carbon markets. And also because companies, large companies, are interested in reducing their footprint, also related to their liability and their image for customers. Next slide, please. So in this context, carbon credit, what we at Verra call a verified carbon unit, which means each carbon credit or verified carbon unit is equivalent to 1 ton of CO2 equivalent as emission reduction or removal. And it is crucial because these credits are used also by companies or by countries to make certain claims. It's crucial to ensure that these reductions and removals are real, that they are measurable, that they are permanent, although there are different rules about that, and that they are additional. And additional in this context means that a project must demonstrate that this reduction was not possible without carbon finance. So it's not something that is being done anyway. For example, in certain regions of the world, if we look at renewable energies, people are transitioning anyway because it's more advanced. And in that case, that wouldn't qualify to receive carbon finance. We really want to focus on the things that need support for this transition. And our role focuses more also on this left side or right side of the slide, independently verified. We have to list transparently each carbon credit, make sure it has a number, a unique number, so that it's not issued twice, and that it's estimated conservatively. That means if we have uncertainties on how high an emission reduction was, then we take the lowest bound, so we don't credit too much of what we are not certain. Okay, next slide, please. Yes, and within these carbon markets, there are different stakeholders that play a role. The first ones provide the supply. So these are what we call project developers or project proponents. Of course, communities involved in the project or where projects are developed. NGOs play a big role. And as Geoffrey and Dennis were saying, also co-ops in the agricultural setting. And they work, of course, directly with agribusiness of different sizes. Then we have Ghg Crediting Programs, which Verra is one of them, but there are several. And they, as I mentioned, they ensure that the emission reductions were real, actually happened, and that they are measured properly and documented. Once the credits are issued, there are different intermediaries that sometimes play a role through selling the credits, brokers or trading platforms. And then there's, of course, the demand side. That means the entities that actually buy the carbon credits. So those are big companies, corporates, sometimes philanthropies, other bigger NGOs, in some cases, individuals. and governments also are starting to play a role in this market. Next slide, please. Yeah, so as I mentioned, Vera is one of the carbon crediting programs, or Ghg crediting programs. We are a non-profit standard setter, and we have developed several different standards. We were established in 2007, and our biggest standard program is the Verified Carbon Standard, or VCS, and that is the world's leading Ghg crediting program. We have other standards that focus more on what so-called co-benefits, although they are sometimes larger than the carbon benefits, as also Geoffrey was mentioning, in terms of yield, stability, and resilience. That's sometimes even more important. And there are now options to credit that. Also towards like broader sustainable development impacts, there's a scheme to credit that. And all our standard programs measure environmental and social impacts. We have several safeguards in place to make sure projects are not just focused on carbon, but they are also beneficial for the community as a whole, and also to make sure there are no negative environmental impacts in other things like water or biodiversity. Yes, so we have right now a little bit about 1,800 projects registered, and we're getting close to 1 billion VCUs, verified carbon units. Okay, next slide, please. Yeah, so the verified carbon standard has basically three elements. One is here in green, the accounting methodologies. There are about 50 of them in different sectors. I'll talk about the agricultural methodologies in a minute. And they set out the rules for how to define project boundary, and that doesn't mean only spatial boundary, but also in terms of which greenhouse gas sources have to be accounted for and which carbon pools. They lay out rules for how to determine baseline scenarios, how to demonstrate additionality, how to do monitoring, and how to quantify outcomes. Then there is an independent auditing of each project through so-called validation and verification bodies. We have about 20 approved globally and are continuously working on increasing that number so that they are more accessible for projects. And that's an important element to ensure like independence and to also improve quality, to make sure it's not only Vera revising projects, but there's also a third-party audit to have a second opinion. And the last one is the registry system. So that's a platform where all projects are listed, all the credits are listed and uniquely numbered. And also when credits get retired and sold, that's also visible in that platform. So you can access that website there, registry.vera.org, and you can see all projects filtered by country, filtered by activity, by methodology. So that's pretty useful sometimes, especially when you're developing a project. Yeah, and as I mentioned, there's also the option to stack these verified carbon standard projects with other standards, such as the Climate, Community, and Biodiversity Standard, and also the Sustainable Development Verified Impact Standard. Although those ones are also possible to use independently. In theory, it's not done frequently, but it's possible. Okay, next slide, please. Yeah, this is or these three graphs are taken from a nice publication I can recommend, given out by the World Bank last year, which focuses on soil organic carbon MRV, and talks a lot about developing carbon projects and rules for monitoring, different guidelines. So it's a good source, and I took out some graphs out of here to just give you a sense like what it means to develop a carbon project. Geoffrey and Dennis touched upon this, but it's important to realize that it's a long process, right? So first you have to define what your project will look like, what is your baseline, what do you want to do, then check different feasibilities, in terms of technical feasibility, regulatory, so about laws, are you following a laws, where are you going beyond laws in terms of benefits, is it financially feasible, and how will we operationalize such a project. Step 3 here on the left side is where we get involved as a standard. So when projects submit their project design document, and yeah, and then it only actually gets started. So then there's the validation of the project, and once the monitoring is completed, then credits are issued. Yes. So here on this lower right graph are the elements of the project design document. So it must include several things, monitoring plans, stakeholder comments, because we always request for a stakeholder consultation to make sure there are no negative impacts for communities, basically, or for any local businesses. That includes also a social and environmental assessment. We ask for assessing permanence and risk of non-permanence, how to avoid leakage, and calculating baseline emissions and an estimate of what the emission reductions will achieve. Of course, additionality and a general description of the project activity. Okay,
Yeah.
next slide, please. Yeah, sure.
Before you go forward, you just explained additionality. Could you explain a bit what leakage means to our audience?
Sure. Yeah, that's a great point. Leakage is, for example, in the livestock context, if you have your project area, let's say, I don't know, 100 hectares to make it simple, and you have livestock in your project area, and one of the largest emission sources are methane emissions from cattle, right? And if you moved, for example, that cattle to another area and then they were still there, you are not accounting for them in your project, but they are happening somewhere else. So that is leakage, basically, to move emissions that had happened in the project area before, to move them somewhere else, and they are still happening. I mean, that was a very easy example because you can move cows around. But the same happens with manure, for example, when you import manure from another area outside of your project, then you build your soil carbon with that, but you're taking it away from somewhere else. So you need to account for those differences. Okay, thank you for that question. Then, yeah, let's move on to this slide. So, yeah, I mentioned agriculture methodology. So in all of these, there are steps defined how to determine leakage, how to determine additionality, and the credits in these methodologies are generated through increasing carbon in certain pools like soil or trees or roots, reducing emissions of nitrous oxide, so through better fertilizer management mostly, reducing methane emissions. That's sometimes associated to livestock, but also, for example, like rice projects through better irrigation management. And also, it's not the most prominent, but also you can reduce CO2 emissions, for example, through reduced fossil fuel in a farm or in several farms. These methodologies cover a broad range of improved land and livestock management practices, and it's also possible to combine several practices. So maybe for all those that were listed in Geoffrey's and Dennis' presentation, you could use only one methodology. You don't have to use one methodology for each activity. Yeah, just on this list, of course, it's hard to say what they are through the numbers, but just to say that some of them focus on soil carbon. Others focus more on, for example, better fire management. That's more in pastures, or on nitrogen management. We have one focused on that. There's one pretty new methodology focused on feed additives for livestock that are supposed to reduce methane emissions, and a new one coming up, I think next month, on the use of biochar, which is also very interesting to improve soil fertility. Okay, next slide, please. Yeah, so yeah, this will be a little bit a repetition of what Geoffrey said, but I want to highlight, like, from our perspective, what we have seen as the biggest challenges for small or folk projects that are working with smallholders, and what we think are also opportunities to tackle these challenges. So first, the high transaction costs, as Geoffrey was mentioning, especially at the beginning. And for that, it's crucial that projects are grouped with a very large number of farmers. So it's 10,000s of farmers sometimes grouped under a project. And that only works when supported by an entity that organizes them, right? It's either NGOs or COPs or a mix. And of course, it's yeah, initially, like while these projects get more common, entities like GIZ or also the World Bank has supported, like, developing structures on how these projects can be achieved. What we have developed on our end is something called projected carbon units, which is a way to issue credits at the beginning of the project and later yeah, kind of cancel them. So you could cover that upfront investment before by estimating how much carbon benefits will your project achieve, and then you are able to get the money first. So, well, if you find a buyer, of course. We only issue the credits. The dealing with the buyer is done by the project developer. Another challenge for smallholder settings is the larger impact of soil heterogeneity, because farms are smaller, and yeah, basically you would need to assess each farm to cover all that soil heterogeneity. And related to that, also high costs for monitoring, especially when it comes to soil carbon. And for that, we see a big potential on new technology. One thing we have now recently added to our one of our methodologies, VM42, are cost-efficient spectroscopic measurement techniques, which lower costs in the laboratory and also have potential to be used directly in the field. So with a robust equipment, you could even avoid sampling. So that would reduce the cost a lot. Similarly, also remote sensing. We see right now, like, as a really demonstrated its potential to support stratification and thus also lower the number of samples, but also to monitor farm activity data. For example, when our farm's tilling, when our farm's applying fertilizer, so that also lowers expectedly costs for monitoring and verification. And we know of several companies and bigger entities that are working on directly measuring or estimating soil carbon through remote sensing. So we look forward to seeing where that will develop in the coming years. Other, like, interesting elements we have seen is, for example, the use of robots to take samples or to also conduct laboratory analysis. So that also expectedly lowers costs and also increases standardization. That's also one benefit. And another important thing is by the use of biogeochemical models, which are continuously being improved. That has been used in one large also project in Kenya to model how soil carbon is increased over time through applying better management practices. Okay, next slide, please. I'm not sure if this is the last one. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. To finalize, also something that Geoffrey closed with, it's important to always, I think, in the communication, especially with agribusiness holders and with smallholder farmers, I thought it was interesting what Dennis said about, like, there are so many myths about carbon projects and about who earns the money, but I think it's always important to, yeah, maybe create like an understanding and sensitization about what does soil health mean, right? Oh, can you stay in the other slide, please? Yeah, thank you. So soil carbon is only one element of soil, and it's at the center of soil health. It has many benefits, but it's important to share with farmers all the benefits of engaging in such a project of improved land management, because they will have several benefits for water retention, water infiltration. They will be able to reduce the fertilizer they use, the agrochemicals they use, that will have benefits for their health. And overall, it will increase like the quality of their soil and productivity, thus making them also more resilient. And many projects also lead to diversification, so either through crop rotation or through introducing trees into farms, or both of them. And that will also give them economic resilience, so they have more diversified income. So yeah, as I mentioned at the beginning, like carbon is a bit the trigger, the catalyzer, but the benefits are much larger in different aspects. So yeah, with that, I think this was my last slide. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Viri. What an interesting presentation. I really like those starting figures. You know, you started by giving us the overall how much we need, 27.4 gigatons to really reduce our emission or cut down completely in order to attain the Paris Agreement targets of reducing emission an increase of 1.5 degree temperature Celsius. And you said voluntary carbon markets can contribute to the maximum 3 gigatons. As of now, 2001, we are at less than 10%. We're at 0.3 gigatons. So there's a huge opportunity in that sector. We're helping to decarbonize the economy, and also, unfortunately, I really noted one of the challenges is that governments are not being very active in this sector. Governments are not taking. I think this is a very big call for concern. It's mostly a corporate taking lead in the section. You know, you just described all the whole process of doing how can you engage in a carbon in a carbon initiative. Is quite similar to what Dennis and Geoffrey presented, and you gave us some very, very different types of methodologies that we can use. You know, we can focus on below ground carbon, which is soil. We can also focus on above ground, like the carbon pool itself. And you have talked about other different types of carbons. And then you gave us the whole chain of the value chain, if I can call it, from the producers or the suppliers right up to the demand or the market, those who are demand. And within there, we have several intermediaries, including the developers, the greenhouse gas standards, which one of you are, and then we have those brokers, the middlemen, who have to look for the market. I think that would be a very good topic for discussion. How do we cut those middlemen in order to have more income or more benefits getting to the local farmers? And what you also mentioned, the importance of safeguards in these projects. How do we make sure that the projects go beyond carbon? You know, they're not just focused on carbon in such a way that, you know, communities are just, oh, carbon, 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 and then they forget about other benefits related to biodiversity, for that. And there are also social and cultural benefits, watershed protection and all those. And how can we pay for that? Some are proposing premiums for that. And you mentioned that very well, and you mentioned the whole process of validation and verification in order to ensure that, you know, effectively emissions have been reduced, that should be paid for. And finally, you came up with some different challenges. The challenges were not different from the ones that Dennis and Geoffrey mentioned. But you also thought about ways of meeting these challenges, especially the high cost of this high transaction cost, the cost of measuring, monitoring, and verification. And then you propose some technologies that are available. I'd like to learn more about the robotic one and the biogeochemical methodologies. I mean, I think in a nutshell, that is interesting things you presented to us this morning. We'll now call on the last speaker. I'm sure we're doing well with time. We'll call on the last speaker, Amos Wekesia. Will be giving us another experience from Kenya Agriculture Carbon Project through the VI agroecology experience. Amos, you are an advisor on environment and climate change. You're a consultant. Can you share your experience? Thank you. Can we have Amos? Okay, if we're missing.
Is speaker.
Oh, great, thanks, Amos. Amos, can you adjust your mic? If you are not unmuted, would you want to unmute yourself and adjust your microphone?
You can.
We can hear you now 5 on 5. Thank you. Amos, you are gone again. We can't hear you at all now.
You can hear me?
I can hear you now perfectly. Thank you, Amos.
Okay. I'm discussing the Kenya Agriculture Carbon Project, which is the first the first African soil carbon project, which was supported by Biocarbon Fund, that's World Bank, initiated by World Bank, and implemented by Via Agroforestry, which is a Swedish NGO working in East Africa for the last 35 plus years. The NGO works with the agroforestry, is known for agroforestry in Kenya. And this project was working with around 30,000 farmers, smallholder farmers, who are organized in small groups of 70, averagely 17 farmers. Majority are women, that's 70% of the project farmers are women. And the project was working in area which is dominated by maize farming. Those around 90% of the cropping system is maize, but also intercropped with beans. That is it. And farmers, the land size is about 0.57 hectares, which these are actually smallholder farmers. And the reasons of starting these projects were three. One, that these farmers, their soil was severely degraded due to soil erosion and also over cultivation. And also there's the little income by households. The financial issues were challenged. Most people are living below poverty line. Around 64% of the farmers here were below poverty line. That is $1 per day. And the business of the farm was low. So the farmers were not doing, were just doing on peasantry kind of farming system. So introducing farming enterprises. And also these farmers lacked, were not using technologies that were improving soil fertility. They were depending on external fertilizers, those are inorganic fertilizers, which are expensive in Kenya and are not affordable or accessible by farmers, smallholder farmers. Also, these farmers were not saving money, were not able to access banks, formal banks. They were not saving, they were not accessing loans, being women also. So the financial systems or access was a problem. That's why you see this project has key features of sustainable agriculture land management, which is a model which is a methodology that was developed under VCA standard to increase soil fertility, to increase soil organic carbon input, and also make the yields increased. And then also we started something like we call village saving and learnings. So it's like a 3 model where farmers were supposed to improve soil, save, and also do business. The projects are located in Western Kenya, in Siaya, Kisumu, and Bungoma counties. And then the project was supported by also Unique Land Use as a project developer, technical support, and so Johannium Research and Pete Smith, the professor of IPCC. So far, we have worked with 30,000 farmers in 300 farmer groups. These groups are actually the aggregators. Those who they work with farmers, they do monitoring, they implement, and then they submit information. And then we contract them in small groups, self-help groups. I think that's a small background of this project. The key features of the project: we have done 4 times of verification and registered with the Vera standards. We can move to the next slide. The importance of this project were 3, and my predecessor have already mentioned, which I can mention only is the carbon payments. The payments, the revenues have streamed already 4 times, around 3.5 million US dollars has been paid to us from voluntary markets. The first payments were done by World Bank through Biocarbon Fund. The second payment are done by Swedish people, Swedish companies, around 17 companies and individual people from Sweden who are compensating their carbon through these projects. And initially, we were paying farmers 60%, which was a $4 per unit carbon. And we were paying around $2.4 to the farmer. And then we save 40% of it to meet the extension. Because we had 35 extension officers working for 3 to 5 years, and also to mobilize farmers and then support extension. So you are paying that, but it was not like, it was not enough because Biocarbon Fund was only paying carbon credits. Via Agroforestry was mobilizing money from donors, private donors. At my 10 years of payback.
Go ahead, Amos. There was a hitch there. Go ahead, please.
You can hear me?
Can hear you perfectly, Amos. Please go ahead. Amos, can you speak to your microphone? We can't hear you.
You can hear me? Okay.
I can hear you perfectly.
Okay, so so the benefits here is about the carbon payments rather than productivity and more months of food. The yields here increased by 95% maize. Of course, the yields were very low. That increment doesn't mean there's food sufficiency, but at least the food increased to some farmers. Around 6 months were able to feed sufficiently and save some money. I think on payments, you can ask me the questions because we had a fair farmer who had more trees on the farm received more money than farmers who had few trees. Farmers who are more in groups received more money than those small in groups. These payments we paid to only farmer groups, but not to individual farmers. But later farmers are shared even if the money was small. You can move ahead again.
Move ahead, Amos.
Yes.
What do you mean by farmers in groups with respect to the size of their fields, or were they paid with the size of their fields, and how did the payment, how did it go on? How was it shared? Was it going to were they organized into groups, and then the head of the group will receive the money and then share it among them, or they must have
farmers who have implemented the project?
Where
yes,
all the
we
farmers
paid those who implemented.
Sorry.
Yes, through common group accounts, through the bank. Of course, we had challenges of that because some money was small, some banks were inactive, but the challenges were not like more. Still, farmers, over 70% of the farmer groups received their payments, and then they shared using their money to maybe strengthen their group and other support, maybe a bursary scheme to their groups or healthy matters and whatever. But they had their own, they used their money the way they want. We didn't dictate how to use the money to them. Move to another slide, please. Another one, this one already mentioned. Okay, the challenges we experienced were this area, most organization lack technical capacity. So CBOs, groups could not do measurements. We were supporting farmers by training them on participatory monitoring system. If they are using SMS or web-based system, we needed computers, we needed digital smartphones. Was high. Still, the extension officers were complaining small salaries, and then moving from farmer to farmer, groups to groups. So extension and monitoring a cost was high. But we try to keep to use farmers, volunteers, or facilitators or lead farmers to collect data from the individual farmer groups, individual members, and then transmit this data through a phone. The price of carbon also was kept $4. And then when you implement through business model we used, we found that money were not supposed to pay to the farmers. But because the donor, the CEDA and the Swedish people were paying that extension, then we paid farmers. Another thing is that the land tenure issues and other rights on the farm. Women farmers were active in Kenya, those who implement practice on the farm, those who compost, those who do mulching, those who do tillage, those who use cover crops, those who harvest seeds, those who plant trees are women. But the land ownership is in the hands of men. And then that one affects the rights, because when these women groups get the money, their men demand this money and payment and other benefits that accrue through carbon projects are used by men and not women who implement. And then this project didn't have pre-financing or advanced payment as other projects that we implement here through corporate relationship with the Livelihood Fund in France. That one, they give us money to do extension. But this one, if you lack money to develop the project before you start, most organizations will not afford to implement carbon price if we scale up. Even government, they might not implement this project because the pre-financing lacking in most carbon projects. Those are the challenges. We move ahead to another slide. These are some solutions that we were using: local people, extension officers, volunteers, community facilitators, farmers, to do trainings and capacity building of farmers. Also, farmer-to-farmer learning was important. We developed satellites or learning centers with farmer groups, especially women groups. They come to learn together. We had demonstration sites. We had a good farmers, so that we have field days to show that. So farmer-to-farmer learning was key. Participatory monitoring system, where farmers were used to collect data, and then one person could follow them. We specialized farmers to do that. We focused also on core benefits by providing livelihoods to the farmers, so that we maintain permanency of some of the carbon pools we've created. Also, flexibility. We could not we must force farmers to have title deeds. We were using family ownership. If farm was owned by within the family, if it's a daughter-in-law owning land on behalf of the son, then the father-in-law, the title could be used. So we were not so rigid to make sure that the owner of the land must have a title. Then financings, the money that came from CEDA, via agroforest, and private donors, individual donors, that partnership helped us to finance the implementation. And then the driving force here is also on farm enterprise development, where you develop a business around maize, around beans, around a commodity that gives more money to the farmer, but also at the end sequester more carbon in the soil. And then also try to plant fodder trees to feed the livestock, and also fruit trees to provide fruits for the family, and also do mixed farming system, though, so that there's more livelihood, more streams of cash to the farmer. And then the financial services, that is village saving and loaning, where women come together and save, and then the end of the year they get interest and profits, and then they share out, and then that money is used to go back to the farm to plant high value crops, which is also help the farmer to maintain the farm again. Linkages to other service providers. Buy the bananas, provide the
Yeah, Amos, we can't hear you anymore. I don't know if you're through or you still having issues with your microphone.
According to hello?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
According to me, carbon project should not be short term. In 20 years crediting period, we are realizing the carbon project is financing its activities and becoming profitable. After 10th year, we are realizing monitoring extension. We had 35, now we have 2. The monitoring people, we had 3, now we have 1. The farmers have taken lead, and then it's about monitoring and verification and payment. So carbon price doable. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Amos, for sharing us that very rich experience from this first Kenya Carbon project that was funded by the World Bank that had almost 3,000 smallholders farmers involved and was covering about 30,000 hectares. Yeah, and the project was addressing sustainable agricultural land management, helping to have farmer enterprise development, village saving and loan association. You know, the project arises from the lack of improved soil fertility and a lot of dependence on external farm inputs like fertilizers in its context where farmers are very poor and also where it's difficult to access to loans. You know, farmers don't have collaterals. And the project was able to generate over 3.5 million US dollars, which was distributed among farmers. 60% of that got to farmers. Help farmers to have extension agents, their services at their disposal to facilitate to increase crop yield. We have the impression that it was a very, very successful projects and also had the same type of challenges that both the first and second presentations elaborated, such as technology, high transaction costs, but above all, you know, there's the lack of data, there's that awareness, you know, there is access to the finances, the costs are varying. Without much ado, ladies and gentlemen, I'll bring you back to the panel. And before then, I want to find out from Lou, do we have any of our participants wanting to come up with questions? But while we are looking for the questions, I have this question for four of you. You have been working with communities, you know, local, small, medium-sized, and farmers. What do you tell them is carbon? What is carbon? What will you tell communities that carbon is? And you are selling carbon. What is it? I will start with Viri.
Thank you. Yeah, that's not always easy. I mean, I don't think it's not everyone that needs this question answered. There are farmers that are very well acquainted. But it's important to say that, I mean, carbon is an element that cycles between soil, plants, atmosphere. And I think it's easier to start with a plant, right? To say plants absorb carbon in a gas form and transform it to biomass, to plants, to roots. And that partly lands again in the soil, and partly it goes back to the atmosphere when it's decomposed. I think that's someone that all farmers can really see, right? How that is being transformed.
Great.
But I'm curious to hear what the others say.
Yeah. And what do you think, Geoffrey?
Yeah, it's usually a very difficult thing to tell the farmer, because there is a commodity we want to sell here, and what is it? And most of the time, what we tell them is that any living thing eat, and therefore plants also heat. And what do they eat? The dark black smoke that goes up. That is the simplest way somebody can understand that. And they eat that, and when you eat food, you store it in your system. You don't release it, and that is what makes us grow. And when you store it, then it becomes a commodity in your land, if it is there. So that is the simple explanation we usually give farmers. So when they grow vegetation, and then those vegetation grow, then they grow because they have stored some of those gases. That is what makes them grow. And that storage is what now people monitor and give you a certificate, which is now a commodity you can sell in the market.
Thank you, Geoffrey. You have the same, sure. Denise?
Yeah, thank you. I also agree with my two other speakers. It's somehow kind of a technical and abstract, maybe to majority of the smaller farmers. But somehow you have also to, because as Geoffrey has said, it's kind of a selling a commodity that you can't really be able to touch on it. But also, what we have to do is we have been doing is that we have to connect it with what they are doing in terms of the sustainable agricultural land management practices that they are doing, showing the benefit, how they can be able to benefit in the long run. I think that's the best way so that we are able to connect with exactly what they are doing with the accrued benefit that they can be able to get in the long run. Thank you.
Thank you, Dennis. And what do you think, Amos? You've been on that first project, and people were probably asking the questions. You know, what is this carbon these guys are telling us now?
Yeah, I think the first thing you need to make materials like posters to farmers, and first course is climate awareness. If they understand why we have climate change, and then you try to show them carbon dioxide. Of course, literacy level in Kenya is like 80%. And the people start understanding carbon dioxide. Then what will be the solutions? When you plant trees, when you have more, when the soil becomes black, increasing more organic matter into the soil, they start understanding the carbon. You don't tell them once and you go, you insist, and then you also develop this indigenous knowledge system where they understand what is carbon. These farmers understand later, and they'll find their gases into the atmosphere. There are also practicals. You can do like a glass of water with different soils. One glass will have water which is floating colorless, and another one which is tabby, and you show those demonstrations. You can also test by touching soils, different soils, and they can see by their face, their own eyes, which soil that has more carbon and which one doesn't have more carbon. And they also see the soil that were next to their homesteads were having more good plants, and they see that that one has more carbon and this one doesn't have more carbon. So if you work with them in that journey, they will start understanding. Yeah. Otherwise, if you come more scientific, you teach them as students in school, they will not understand. But if you go with them in practicals, indigenous knowledge, way of thinking, elders talk about them, they know these things actually, and they understand. Yeah.
I think that is the backbone of the awareness raising, because if people are suspicious of what carbon is, then it becomes a huge problem, right? You know, I have experience where we have to tell, you know, we're doing with overground or above ground carbon. So you have to explain you have to share the experience of a tree growing in the house, in the shade. It's very weak and green and it's easily cut off. And the tree growing outside, which is very strong and stout. And, you know, when it's in the house, it doesn't cap that carbon. So it is a lot of water. But when it's outside, it's able to catch that carbon. And then you create the links between carbon and climate change. I mean, those experiences are very, very important for awareness raising. Otherwise, people feel that this is witchcraft, you know. Some guys came into our forest and carried tons of carbon in their bags and went away. Well, that was just a teaser for the day. I want to come back to the presentation you all gave. One of the issues that you raised was land rights. And these land rights have been manifested differently. There are temporal landholders who hold land for 1 to 3 years. And then there are also in other communities where there is a difference between customary rights to land and statutory right to land. Customary right is like, okay, traditionally this land belongs to our family. And then statutory land is that the land belongs to the government. So how can we, and I understand that in a typical carbon project, we have to ensure that there is ownership of land in order to ensure permanence. If you don't own the land, then you don't have control over the land, and then somebody else can come and take the land, and then we lost the carbon benefits. So what are your experience, and how can we address this issue of land? Who want to take the floor? I know you've been working across projects, so and across countries. Will you want to start? Okay, then Geoffrey will take on.
Yeah, there are different land rights that we have in Kenya. We have communal land, we have private land, and we have government land. Now, the communal land is land that is owned through the community. In that case, you go through the community. They are also through community leaders, because they hold that land on trust on behalf of the community. So if they give you a go ahead with the support of the community, then that ensures the right to use for a particular period of time that you have given, then it makes the project a little bit stable in terms of land right. The second is private land. That private land, somebody could have the title deeds, the government documentation proving that he owns the land. But there are cases, because these are costly things, there are cases where people don't have it, those papers showing that they own the land, the title deeds. In those cases, the community will give approval of who owns which land. And in that case, you can use that as a security on those lands. And so that is how we do it.
Great, thank you. Any government effort will not, well, in a case where government recognizes, government recognizes customary rights, right? Yeah. Barry, you've been working with standards, and you've gone across different countries and different land experience. How, at the level of standards, how do you address this? And perhaps I'll add another experience, which is coming from mostly in Central Africa, where there is usually a conflict between this statutory, like government says it owns all the land, and whereas traditionally, the different families and households own the land, So, and will a standard go for a statutory or for a customary or for both?
Yeah, we're actually very flexible. The only thing that is required by our standard is that this is something that's clarified, either through contracts, some projects do it like that, or through agreements between landowners and the leasers of the land, or if it's as Geoffrey said, owned by the government, then that has to become clear. And the good thing is that carbon projects are also limited in time. Mostly it's a longer time period, but some projects do, for example, 5-year contracts that are renewed. And then, there it's also clarified who will own the carbon benefits. I think what's more challenging is on also land prices, because of course, like a story of land or improved land management will increase the value of the land, right, for later. So if it's sold later, that's something that only comes back to the landowner. But that also goes beyond carbon. So it's an important issue, but we are very flexible in how projects demonstrate it.
That's useful. Amos or Dennis, you want to add something on that?
Yeah, I think the major problem in Kenya, also other than what Geoffrey has mentioned, is the way you can process your land to obtain a title deed. It faces challenges like corruption, bureaucracy, and delays. There is no even land. Most land are owned by community here, and some land were mapped already in 1972, but title deeds have never been provided to the new owners. So getting a title is a challenge. And also the major challenge is also land use change. Urbanization, buying land for other things, roads, constructions, Those are the challenges, and also private people buying bigger land and taking communities away. So those are the challenges we are facing, especially land use change, and also
Great.
speculation and land becoming very expensive. Yeah, those
That should
are the
be
issues
mostly around urban areas, right? Yeah, Dennis, you want to say something?
Yeah, I want to be quick around something. The issue of land is an issue really, and but I'm in agreement with what Amos and Jeffrey has mentioned. But I think one way that we have been trying to engage the communities is really approaching the various gatekeepers, working with the local authorities, trying to sensitize them to know the need of the objective that we want to achieve, so that they can be able to have this the buy-in. Otherwise, that what we have seen, without bringing all that, it brings all these suspicious bit of it, and at the end of the day, you're likely to have issues of conflict here and there. Thank you.
Great. And we got a question there. We still have a few minutes to go. How do we address the specific problems on gender? I'd like also us to talk about the high transaction cost between the farmers and what can we do to remove some of those I call them redundant intermediaries from the whole chain. That would have been also a very important discussion. So I'll give you a round of very rapidly. I know after this we have break. Very rapidly, just to reflect on how do we integrate gender, how do we address the gender problem in land, but also how could we reduce the transaction cost so that communities can get more benefits. So we start with Viridiana. Final remarks and addressing any other things you want to pass on.
Yes.
Take-home message.
No, I mentioned the projected carbon units, and that's something we think has a big potential to. It won't lower the transaction cost, but it will provide like a tool on how to finance that from the beginning. So I'll drop a link in the chat.
That's like an ex-ante payment.
Yeah, more or less. But I will drop a link in the chat because we're currently having a public consultation on the concept. And yeah, about the gender issue with land tenure, I don't know, we can solve that from a standards perspective. I mean, we always do require, as part of the safeguards documentation, that there is consideration of gender issues, and it doesn't cause any conflicts. But yeah, the issue with that women are the ones who are working the land and don't own it, that cannot be solved through a carbon project, for sure.
Great. Thank you, Geoffrey.
Yeah, I think that is a very tricky one, because in most community, especially like my community, Kenya, land is basically owned by men. And so changing that will be very tricky. But for a carbon project, what we usually do is we kind of promote joint ownership, so that the woman has equal right, and that when there are benefits, then we are looking at the benefits that accrues to a woman and as well as a man, so that they both benefit. And if they are both happy, then they will keep moving the project forward. And finally, land use projects are projects that are long-term in most cases, and sometimes getting finances to finance these activities for a long period of time becomes very difficult. The carbon revenue comes in to fill that gap, and I think it is very important. Not that carbon revenue is good revenue that can uplift people's standard of life, but they can change their livelihood because they have money which they have generated through their activities to do programs and activities that benefits them as a community. That's
Great.
what I would say as a conclusion. Thank you.
Thank you, Geoffrey. Is Amos there or Dennis?
Okay. Yeah, I think there is no real question or okay, sorry. Amos?
I think on gender, The major mistake we did was starting a project without gender lens. Later, introducing gender was a big problem. So you need to start a project, even the standard itself has to have a gender issue. And when you develop a project, you start with the gender analysis, gender transformative pathway. For example, in agroforestry, we introduced what we call a planning tool, where men and women in a family assess and children assess what their roles and what they are doing, what they own, and what is their pathway in 5 years to come, common, so that they plan together. And you don't tell them that you're addressing gender, but they plan to share things equally, to have a common vision of the family, and then transform. That's a household level. At community level, you need to empower to work with the chiefs in areas where chiefs are, pastors, sheikh, all these people, because they are the promoters of gender inequality. So you need to bring them on board. Gender was mistaken, understood as a woman issue. Then they talk with women when they are talking about gender. So men are decision makers. They're the one to make gender decision also, so that they empower their women to work together with them. So I think the approaches experts have done were mistakes and starting. Also data, it has become a problem. When you present the data, you don't present with the gender of youth, of men, and even other men with different opinions. So you need to disaggregate data from the beginning. You need to have these tools you need to start gender from the beginning within the project and work with it and end with it. It is doable because by observation, women are taking more role now on farming than men. And that is very easy to transform even the roles, women doing what men can do. Yeah, I think we've tried that, but it's not easy. It's not a one day thing. You need to do within 20 years. Even payment of revenues, even monitoring, even training, gender has to be mainstreamed with all those aspects. The people who mess up with the project are the staff themselves. They are also not gender transformed.
Thank you, Amos. Final words, Dennis?
Yeah, thank you. Our focus has been ensuring that we have both the man and the woman from the household participating, having an active participation in the project, to somehow ensure that issues of the gender are well integrated in the project. And we also check on the participation mainly of the women on the various the community level in terms of decision making, in terms of even the sharing of the responsibility, especially in the farm and those kind of the things. But I think as Geoffrey mentioned it, there are project aspirations, and then there is also the community status quo, and that at times bring kind of an issue per se. But also what we have seen, an inclusion of various stakeholders, especially the community really leaders. Somehow they are able to really support the project in handling some of these gender-related issues. Thank you.
And thank you very much, all of you. I think we got some very interesting lessons learned from your experience. Carbon projects are very important. Despite the challenges of having data, creating awareness, we can go beyond those challenges, and you have explained very healthy experiences on how to improve awareness, how to integrate gender, and you've shown that clearly that these projects have multiple benefits: social cohesion within communities. As you do community organizing, they can produce supplementary income from the high. You all said there's an increase in yield. There's increase in yield from the crops themselves. Carbon benefits come like extra, and other multiple benefits like biodiversity and other premiums like soil fertility and so forth. Those are premium. This is possible if we need governments to take a better position. You all mentioned that. Governments have to get into PPP, public-private partnerships. We need to build capacity for communities so that they can self-organize and we have to reduce the other redundant intervenants by strengthening communities. You all made it wonderful. So there's a need to scale this up in Africa, and so that communities can have these benefits from carbon projects. Thank you very much. I see Lou. Lou was with us and she's raising her hand up. Lou?
No, it was just to signal that we should sadly end the session, even though
Yeah.
it was very interesting for me.
Very interesting for me too. Thank you very much.
But also we need to integrate policy advocacy, something very important.
Very important. Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay. Have a wonderful rest of the conference and see you soon. We now have a break.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you for us. Bye.